Today we're going to take a look at Gibson guitar picks from the 1970s and 80s. They were really into black during this period, and you'll see most of these are black. Going up here, the Gibson gripper from the 1970s, we can see that it did come in four shapes, three different gauges. And my concern with all these picks here was not collecting all the gauges in a particular shape, but in collecting all the different font colors and variations in shape, and you'll see that with some picks more than others. Go over here to the Teardrop logo, and you can see it has that raindrop or splash, as they call it, the splash logo. It came in gold and in silver, as we see with these two 351 shapes up here. Now, down here, I kept these two because there's a slight difference in the size of the font, but that one's gold and that one's silver. And then we have a gold one here as well. Coming over here, these Gibsons are actually quite rare. I don't find them often. I came across them during one period of time while hunting picks in Orange County, California. Never seen them again. And down here we see logo variations in terms of thickness of the logo compared to that one. And you may not be able to see it here, but this pick is actually slightly smaller than those two. Coming down here to the Les Paul shape, we can see it in gold and in silver as well. And over here, we have this variation on a cut that occurs clear back to the 1930s amongst different manufacturers, and it always occurs with this deep slant. I kind of wonder whether that was something they did at the factory in limited numbers, but it does show up repeatedly throughout vintage guitar picks through the 30s to the 80s, but not very often. Here we have two 351s, gold and silver. Hearts. This heart here is actually larger than these two hearts here. And as you can see, there is variation in terms of the thickness. This is a thicker logo, yet smaller. It's thinner letters here, but they are slightly larger. And again, variations with a small jazz shape. Well, this may actually even go back to the 60s, because that logo was popular then and through the 70s. But so that concludes the 1980s. Let's run over here to the 1990s when they started using the USA logo. Just do a little pan shot so you can get the effect of that gold hot stamp print. Down here we see the few white ones that came later on. Here's an acetyl polymer, not celluloid. In fact, most of these are not celluloid, except for the tortoiseshell. We'll go up here. We'll see that type of tortoiseshell. This actually goes back to the 80s and or 70s and into the 80s. Now, just because I say these are from the 1970s or 1980s doesn't mean they didn't have a crossover period, of course, meaning some bled into the decade of the other. But you'll see variations with the USA. Look how small that USA is there compared to that in the gauge marking. That's a very large gauge marking right there compared to those two gauge markings. So that's what I was looking for. Variations in print size, thickness. You'll see this is a nice, brilliant gold hot stamp, and that is rather dull by comparison. You see it has no shine as that one does there. And we have the hearts that were produced during that period of time, both in silver and gold. Of course, the focus again is on those variations and not on gauges, but variations. This here variation, you can see it's actually much more narrow than one to the left or to the right. And in terms of a variety of logos, look at the difference in the USA, or that color difference between the sharp, brilliant gold and that dull gold there. And finally, as we saw before, the Gibson whites, which I believe were the last ones to be produced. So there you have it, Gibson picks from the 1980s to 1970s through the 80s. And you could even still find them if you're a collector into the 90s. That's when I found most of these. Do a quick pan of these. And as Joe, reach me at finepicks7@yahoo.com. Take care. Thanks for joining me.